So the first side, or the first page of the Style Tips Guide, is a really powerful tool by which you can explore a variety of sentence structures that can add logical sophistication and clarity to your prose. And you'll see on the page that the sentences are organized by the type of variety they introduce. So in the top of the page, you can see that there are forms of initial variety and internal variety that you can use to create more engaging and logically powerful structures in your prose. And if you scroll down the page, you can see that there are also terminal forms of variety, which means things at the end of sentences you can do to add power and clarity to your writing. So just so you can get a sense of how this all works, let's take a slightly closer look at a couple of examples. So if we take a look here at some of these initial variety techniques, you can see how the page is structured. So first of all, you're given the technical term for the approach. So what this means is a form of initial variety that you can use to make your writing more logically powerful is an introductory subordinate clause. And a subordinate clause is a clause that begins with a subordinating conjunction. In this case, the word because. Other examples of powerful subordinating conjunctions are although, while, even though, when, and if. But there are literally a couple dozen others you can play with, and you can actually find a list of them at the bottom of this form. But what's important for understanding how to use this form is you're given the definition, and then you're given a little visual abbreviation of what this kind of sentence looks like. So DC here stands for dependent clause, comma. Whenever you have an introductory dependent clause, there's always a comma, and then an IC, an independent clause, and a period. You may have heard that referred to as a main clause. So let's look at what this sentence looks like. So first of all, here's the dependent clause. Because subordination can help you express complex relationships more concisely, comma, notice the punctuation. Always important when you're using this form to copy the punctuation exactly. The punctuation is vital to the sentence structure. And then you have the main clause after that, where you get, I recommend, sorry, the cursor isn't working real well here. I recommend employing this technique frequently in your writing. That's the main clause. But what you want to really understand is not so much this specific technique as the way the form is structured. So a little identifier, subordinate clause, that's the technique being used here, an introductory subordinate clause. A little abbreviation to remind you of the punctuation rules and structures, and then a sentence that models the style. Okay? So now, with that in mind, there's so much you can do here because you can look at your own paper and sort of see what you're doing. Often you get into a subject, verb, object type model. The symbol means X, the symbol means Y. Langston Hughes argues X, Langston Hughes argues Y. And sometimes you can really improve the clarity and the logical relations in your prose by playing with some other models. So here, for example, we're looking at a couple of initial variety techniques, but we could also look at other key places where different techniques and variety could help you. For example, right over here, we can see some internal variety forms. In other words, stuff you can do in the middle of a sentence that can clarify things. So there's a coordination technique of using independent clauses combined with coordinating conjunctions. And again, there's a sample that is correctly punctuated. There is the coordination technique of using a semicolon with a transitional word or phrase, like however, for example, in other words. Again, notice the punctuation, semicolon before, comma after, and lots of other good examples of other techniques that you can use. In fact, in this internal area, there are 4 different techniques. In the initial variety area, there are also there are 4 different techniques that you can see in this first screen, but when you move beyond, there's actually 2 others for a total of 6. All right, and actually, I'm sorry, when you look over here on internal techniques, there's a 5th one, the use of a 4th one, the use of appositive phrases. So you've got 4 internal variety techniques over there, and you got 6 initial variety techniques over here on this side of the form. So right there's 10 different sentence structures that you could play around with to add diversity and variety, and more important than that, clarity of relationships. One other set here are what I call the terminal variety, a subordinate clause at the end, or what's called a resumptive modifier after a semicolon, where what comes after a colon, what comes after the colon comments on the main clause. You can use a list set up by a colon. Notice that there are strict grammatical rules on what that looks like and how you punctuate that, in particular featuring a colon followed by a series of parallel structures. And then what's called a summative modifier, where you can play with a dash or use a colon. So another 4 different techniques you can use. So 14 different sentence models on this one page, all of which give you the grammatical rule, but also give you an example of what that kind of sentence looks like. So you can put your sentence ideas into that kind of model, your language and ideas into sentences that follow that structure. One last thing to quickly show you at the bottom of page 1, there is here a list of useful subordinating conjunctions and useful transitional expressions and conjunctive adverbs. These are really important because a lot of times just having that word like although or as if or as long as to put at the beginning of the sentence reminds you of how you could restructure yours. Same with these transitional phrases. People get stuck on however, therefore, furthermore, like they're the only ones. But what's cool about this list is you can see how many different ideas there are here. I'm going to resize this a little bit, see if we can see the whole list on one screen. And what's cool about this list, as I said, one more shrink, huh? What's cool about this list, as I said, is that there are so many other options you can play with. Why not try a semicolon followed by for example, or for this reason, or in this way? Why not try other transitional words like accordingly and afterwards, rather than just the former, however, and therefore? So lots of possibilities here for you to play with. And that's what page 1 looks like. And page 1 is the really crucial part of this sheet. I'm going to talk about page 2 in a separate video, but page 1 is really where you should be working when you're revising your paper. Because what you get on page 1, as we said, is at least 14 different approaches to using sentences to clarify your logic and to vary your structures and the flow of your prose. All of those sentences provided in the context of the grammar moves they represent, and along with that, you're provided a sample sentence that applies the model. So it's a really, really powerful, helpful tool. I hope you have fun with it. I hope you reach out to me if you have any questions about it. Thanks.